we're going to continue with Paul's journey. He's going to go from one end of the spectrum that we talked about last week to the absolute opposite end today. But before we do that, let's start with a word of prayer. Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here to hear your word and to listen to how your servants, grew this church from its beginnings. Open our eyes, ears, hearts, and minds that we may share with one another and learn from one another, not only today, but in all the days to come. Amen. Okay, from last week, remember, Paul went to Thessalonica. How'd things go there?
They ran him out of town.
Yeah, they kind of ran him out of town. Now, the reason I say that is, remember, he writes letters later on to the Thessalonian church. So a church does start there. But first impression wasn't all that good. And remember, when he went to the next town, what happened?
They put him in prison.
Well, no, they followed him and threw him out there too. Yeah, so basically, this guy was stirring up enemies as much as he was stirring up friends. So then he ends up in Athens. We had the tape spent a lot of time showing you what Athens looked like. What problem did he face there?
They had all those gods, right?
Yeah. They had all those gods and all those philosophers and all of these people that did, and remember, in ancient Greece, it was considered an occupation to be a professional debater. People would pay money to watch these guys discuss high-level stuff. And think about that. You sit there and listen to 3 hours and two guys, argue with one another. But then again, that's not all that different from reality TV, I suppose. All right, now, Paul is going to move on to a city called Corinth. We're going to spend a lot of time on what Corinth was about. So if somebody start us off by reading Acts 18, 1 to 11.
Oh,
Okay.
After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, and as they worked, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reseasoned in a synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when the Jews opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titus and Judas, a worshiper of God. Cyprus and the synagogue ruler and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who had heard him believed and were baptized. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack on you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God.
So what's the first part of this lesson? What did Paul decide to do here?
Still trying to be converts.
Well, what did he say about the Jews?
That the Jews didn't accept him, he was going to the Gentiles.
So now he said, remember it said, you read it right there, Dave. It said, I went to the synagogue for many weeks. Okay? Nobody listened. So since you didn't listen, I'm not going to spend my time with you. Now, when writers write anything, There is a reason why they put statements in their writing. Notice where one of the converts that's mentioned is lived. Where did he live? Right next door to the what?
Oh, the synagogue.
He was right next door to the synagogue. He was right next door to the synagogue, which, you know, think of the attitude it took to do that. I'm going to take care of you people over there. I'm going to take care of this guy. And you have to believe they saw him do that. Also, who was the second convert mentioned? Right after that.
Titus? Titus?
Well, there's the ruler of the synagogue. What was his name?
Crispus.
Yeah. So the ruler of the synagogue, remember I explained that there's a president of the synagogue, or whatever they called him, the ruler I suppose, who ran everything. Now he's the next one. Nobody else in the synagogue wants to get converted, but the guy who's running the place does.
Okay.
And his whole household. Remember, in those days, a household was wife, children, slaves, hired hands, anybody who lived there. So that might have been 20, 30 people. So Paul is fighting this whole thing all along. He's trying his best to reach out to his Jewish brother, and they turn out they're not interested. So at this point, he's saying, well, heck with you then. And remember what God tells him to do. Which was what?
Stick.
Yeah. Keep on fighting. I'm with you. Keep on fighting the good fight. Well, first of all, the Acts does not tell you the whole story about the city of Corinth. Corinth is I'm trying to think of a current day city that's close to it. I would say it would be Las Vegas with an attitude. I mean, that is the key to it here. It's Las Vegas with an attitude, and it's I don't know how else to say it. This was kind of like New Orleans in the pirate days. You know, there was a lot going on in the city, and chances were not very much of it was very good. Corinth, this is what William Barclay wants you to know about the city of Corinth, so you can figure out what Paul is really up against. In its very position, Corinth was a key city in Greece. Greece is almost cut in two by the sea. On one side is the Saronic Gulf with its port of Centuria, and the other is the Corinthian Gulf with the port of Lycium. Between the two is an isthmus. You know what an isthmus is, just a narrow neck of land. Less than 5 miles across, and on that isthmus, that little narrow spot, is where Corinth is. All north-south traffic in Greece had to pass through Corinth because there was no other way to get from north to south. The city was called the Bridge of Greece, but the voyage around the southern extremity of Greece was a very, very perilous one. The southernmost cape was Cape Malea, and to round it was the equivalent of rounding Cape Horn. You all know where Cape Horn is, right? The Greeks had a proverb, let he who thinks of sailing around Malea make his will. Consequently, east-west trade of the Mediterranean also passed through Corinth, for many chose that way rather than the perilous voyage around Media. Corinth was the marketplace of Greece. Corinth was more than a great commercial center. It was also the home of the Isthmian Games, which were second only to the Olympics. Corinth, this is the key, Corinth was a wicked city. The Greeks had a verb, to play the Corinthian, which meant to live the life of a lustful, debauched person. The word Corinthian came into the English language in the early decades of the 19th century in Regency times to describe a reckless young man who indulged in riotous and notorious living. In Greece, even if ever a Corinthian was shown on a stage, in a play or something, he was shown drunk. Dominating Corinth stood on the hill of the Acropolis, and the hill was not only a fortress, it was the temple of Aphrodite. In its great days, the temple had 1,000 priestesses of Aphrodite who were sacred prostitutes and who at evening came down to the city streets to ply their trade. It became a proverb, not every man can afford a journey to Corinth. This was a city in which Paul lived and worked and had some of his greatest triumphs. When he was writing to the Corinthians, he made a list of all kinds of wickedness. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God, he wrote. Do not be deceived. Fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revelers and robbers, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. And when it comes to the triumphant praise, and this is what some of you used to be, he says, the very iniquity of Corinth was the opportunity for Christ. So, he goes from Athens, where everybody is learned and, talks about, high-level stuff, and to a place where, it's basically almost anarchy.
When the Lord talked to Paul, is he telling him to give up on these people?
What he's saying is concentrating. What he's saying is give up. Not necessarily give up on the Jews, but concentrate on the Gentiles, and the Jews don't listen to you. Is what he's telling them. Jesus said the same thing. He said, "I was sent to preach to you, and you didn't listen." When you go to Telestai next weekend up at down at Gilmore Academy, and the song he sings, one of them is, "You sent me to teach them, but I cannot reach them." So God is saying to Paul, "Hey, wait a minute, I got a whole lot of other people." Remember, he said, I have people in the city. Yeah. He had a whole lot of other people that he wanted Paul to reach. So he's saying, if you're going to spend your time on them. So I want you to see what the tape says about Corinth, and you'll get some idea of what he was facing. Now, how in the heck the guy went from...
For in him we live and move and have our being. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject."
So this is where he's still in
Paul
Athens.
left the council. A few became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. The Roman Emperor Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Well, Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. The eastern harbor of Corinth is called Cenchreae. From the ancient lighthouse, we can look down into the crystal clear harbor and see the foundations of the ancient warehouse buildings. Paul's ship drops anchor and he steps ashore. The Christians of Corinth would build a basilica here on the harbor, and for some strange reason this entire coastline sank. But we can look down and see the original steps. From here, the Greeks would drag their ships across the Isthmus of Corinth. We can still see the dragging place, the Thoikos. They probably used wooden rollers. Julius Caesar wanted to dig a canal, and so did the Emperor Nero, but it wasn't finished until the 19th century. The Corinth Canal saves 200 miles for modern-day shipping. Acro-Corinth rises above the city where the temple of Aphrodite once stood. The city itself is on the plain, where the temple of Apollo still stands after 2,600 years. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, with her Eros and the satyr, she ruled this city with 1,000 prostitutes. Corinth, a city of unbelievable vice. Sailors and ship captains from every dominion of the ancient world, coming from as far away as China. Well, the Romans had their baths, but the Greeks had their fountain houses. People would gather here to find out what was going on in the world. In a way, it served as a newspaper, a social gathering place, for not only a source of sweet spring water, but as a place of conversation, and what a perfect place for the apostle to tell his good news. This young couple came all the way from Marseille in southern France. They came to study Paul. And this German couple point to the Vima, the rostrum, where the great orators gave their speeches. We know that Paul was here for 16 months, working as a tent maker with Aquila and Priscilla. It is to these Corinthians that he gives his most wonderful message. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love, because God is love.
Just for my information, you got a guy taking his family, Aquila, come from Italy. What would encourage them to travel like that, from Italy to Greece? How did he know something about Greece?
First of all, he got kicked out of Rome. That was why they moved. But also, remember, this guy was a businessman. And there was a huge market for what he would provide in that city. So he's going with jobs for it. But, you know, remember, they got kicked out of Rome. Rome was not a good place for Christians from time to time. And it depended on who the emperor was. And in this case, the emperor said, you know, I want all the Jews out of town. And we'll see that from Paul's last missionary journey, somehow they ended up coming back. But that's why he went there. There was good money in it. And, you know, because actually it's not, when they say it's a tent maker, what they really mean is he works with the particular types of skins and canvases and such. And they make a whole lot more than tents. So, but tent maker was the easiest translation that you could come up with. I mean, they made water bottles, they made, you know, stuff for tables, they made all kinds of different things.
I have a question
Mhm.
and a comment. When you said the city is kind of like akin to Las Vegas or New Orleans, when you were describing all the debauchery, Bangkok popped into my mind, from what I've heard. But,
Yeah.
and I have a question about the fountain. You said the Romans had their
Yeah.
bathhouses. Well, what's it called in the Greek? It was a fountain, like with the spring water.
I have to go back and look.
I guess my question is, they said, you know, in that city of debauchery,
Yeah.
it sounded like that was like a pure spot, like an oasis where people actually did come for,
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
something more substantial than debauchery.
Yeah, exactly, except, you know, I'm not exactly sure what the dress code was. Now, see, that's the thing. You saw the statue, okay? You know, there was no holds barred on that statue there. So keep in mind that Aphrodite was the goddess of love, and you saw the Eros around her. And yeah, this was supposed to be like the meeting spot. Back where my parents' house was, there used to be a sundry store right on the corner. And everybody in the neighborhood would come in there and have a cup of coffee and talk about news of the day and all this kind of thing. So it served that purpose. I remember I had to get, you know, my hair cut in Northern California. Linda and my mother went shopping, and I looked in there, there's one barber in there, there's like 5 guys sitting in there. So I said, go do your shopping, you know, it's going to be well. And so the guy's done in the chair, and he points at me and says, you're next. I said, well, what about these other guys? Well, they're not here for a haircut, they're here to talk. So, this was kind of like you said, this is kind of like the one place where you could relax and take it easy, and you wouldn't be accosted or anything like that. Remember what's going on here. You have all of these ships that are coming, and then they have these people whose job it is to pull these ships all the way across the 5 miles and put them in the water on the other side. Now, it's okay if it's a canoe. But not so much. You saw the size of some of those boats. I mean, you know, it took forever to do that. But it was a lot easier doing that than it would have been to sail around, because apparently the tides around that southern part of Greece were just nasty. So you had all of these ships coming through, and let's put it this way: every time you have a ship, you have sailors. And every time you put sailors in a city like that, guess what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. You had that going on. Also, there's a whole lot of people out there that are making a bundle of money off of all this. You know, we have words for them in this country. But somebody was, you know, the prostitutes weren't making a whole lot of money. Somebody else was getting the money from them. You know, take care of the temple and everything. So imagine this. Paul has gone from a master, you know, where he's talking to all these masters and doctorates, to a place that's you know, the most wicked city that anybody knows of in that area, and he does it within weeks. And remember, he got there by himself. Remember, he left the other 2 guys behind to pick up the pieces, you know, and. Because remember, you read it, David said they showed up later. So he's there by himself. The only people he knows are those 2 people he met, Aquila and Priscilla, who are the tent makers. Other than that, he doesn't know a soul. And so, yeah, that's right. I think they call them fountain houses. I think that's what they said. But basically, like I said, I don't know what the dress code is at those places. I have a feeling that, I can't be sure of this, but I have a feeling that it's a little, my kids are arrested here in this country in some places. But, the whole point is Paul has got an uphill battle with these folks. And if you read, at some point we're going to talk about the 2 letters he wrote. Okay, because the letters he had to write the first letter, and then when the first letter didn't take, he had to write the second one. And basically what's going on is the church he sets up cannot fully resolve the mores of the city. So basically they said, well, yeah, we understand we're supposed to do this, we're supposed to do that, but we're from Corinth, so we'll let you get away with a few other things for now. And so Paul had to go back there and with another letter and say, wait a minute. Also that you heard the famous Corinthian part about love. It's used at a lot of weddings. Okay, he really didn't mean that when he wrote it. What he was talking about is the love that Corinthians had to have for each other, respectfully. But it's in our culture, it's been considered, it's the thing you read at weddings. And I met Jill Hudson, who was the executive for the Synod of the Lincoln Trails. And she said that she and her husband would go out and, they live in Indianapolis, and go out to all of these nice restaurant type places, where a meal we pay $20 for costs like $100. And so they got to know all the people that worked at these places, and a lot of them didn't have a church home. So she said anytime there was a wedding, they used to, they used to call her to see if she'd do it, because she was the only pastor they knew. So she did a wedding for one of these couples one time, and a lot of the friends from the restaurant were there. And at the end of the, they used that in the service, and at the end of the service, a couple comes up and said, Pastor, that was a wonderful poem you read. We're going to get a copy. So, Paul's got his work cut out for him. You remember how long he stayed?
18 months.
17.
Yeah, that's long. Remember, everybody else, he was there a couple of months and left. He's there 17 months. So he poured a lot of himself into this ministry. So you can imagine what he felt like when the word came back that not everything is clicking. So you heard what I read about all the words he used about how he described them. He pulled no punches. So while he was there, also not on the tape, they found him again. And there is a proconsul called Gallio. Now, Dave asked last week, how do they know he was a Roman citizen? Well, basically, there's no ID mark or anything, but basically, if you're a Roman citizen, there were things you knew that everybody else didn't. And now it's a shall we say, a fight to convince people. For example, when he grew up in Tarsus, he knew the proconsul in Tarsus and all of the lieutenants and all that kind of thing. And he would say, I was a friend of somebody or other, whatever this guy's name was. And they know who he was. And they also knew that if he was lying, they'd find out. So, but here was a situation where they couldn't figure out how to shut him up. As we learned earlier, they tried kicking him out of town. That didn't work. So they came up with another plan. Would someone like to read Acts 18:12 to 17?
Gallio was proconsul of, I was pronouncing it. The Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him into court. This man, they charged, is persuading people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if you Jews were making a complaint against some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things. So he had them ejected from the court. Then they all turned on Septimus, the synagogue ruler, and beat him in front of the crowd. But Gallio showed no concern whatsoever.
Gallio's the proconsul. He's like Pilate. See, they learned a lesson from Pilate in this whole thing. They learned a lesson and said, hey, you know, because according to the law, a church council could not condemn somebody to death. Only the Romans could do that. And the only way you could get the Romans to do that was to prove that this guy was doing bad things and it will lead to an insurrection or a riot or some disturbance. Are you familiar with the Pax Romana? That's the Roman peace. The number one priority for all these proconsuls was to keep the Pax Romana. Keep these people quiet. You know, because if they start making noise, I gotta send the army in, and they're busy conquering other countries. We don't have time to deal with ones we already took care of. So so this is what Gallio is saying. Hey, you haven't done anything to me. I haven't done anything along those lines. You want a problem? You figure it out. So at this point, also Paul probably whispered in his ear that he was a Roman citizen, which again gives you special privileges in courts like this. But they've tried to go for the authorities, and that didn't work. So here you have a situation where Paul has been brought up against the authorities. He's beaten that. He's been stoned. He's been through an earthquake. He's been put in jail. He's been thrown out of town. He's been all of these, and he's still on his way.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's saying that he's turning it back over to the Jewish leaders to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Why did they beat, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Septimus? Why did they beat him? They didn't beat Paul.
No, because he was, as I recall, he was part of the court. And let me answer that question by going to.
This seems kind of weird. It's like, okay, we can't get Paul, so we have to do something to somebody.
Yeah. So it says. For some reason, Barclay doesn't talk about it. He says, as usual, the Jews sought to make trouble for Paul. It was very likely that it was when Gallio became first proconsul that the Jews attempted to get him to act against the Christians, trying to influence him before he was settled in. Gallio was famous for his kindness. Seneca, his brother, said of him, even those who love my brother Gallio to the utmost of their power do not love him enough, and also said, no man ever was as sweet to one as Gallio is to all. The Jews sought to take advantage of Gallio, but he was an unbiased Roman. He was well aware that Paul and his friends were not guilty of any crime, and the Jews were trying to use him for their own purposes. At the side of the judgment seat were his lictors, the court officials, who were armed with rods, and he ordered them to drive the Jews from his judgment seat. So that's what that was about. The Authorized Version translates the latter part of verse 17. Gallio cared for none of these things. That has often been taken to mean that Gallio was uninterested, but its real meaning is that he was absolutely fair and refused to allow himself to be influenced. So, when you ask why they beat up this guy, Gallio says, "Get him out of here."
Okay.
And-
It was Gallio's people that beat him, or
Yeah.
was it the Jews that beat?
No, it was Gallio's guys that did that, because, apparently he wasn't going to leave. So, this was a pretty violent society. Remember, they didn't have, they weren't really into prisons. Basically, when you committed a crime, you got 30 lashes and then don't do it again, or 60 lashes, or something like that. Although there were prisons around, the point of the matter was that the prison system that we know today was actually designed in this country by the Quakers. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the Quakers actually had the first prison. It was in Philadelphia. And the idea was that if you put them in a room and give them a Bible and a candle, they'll read it every night and come out better people. But back in those days, they figured, if I beat you up enough, you'll change your ways. So that was not all that uncommon. But the point that you have to understand is, as we go through Holy Week coming up, Pilate did exactly the opposite of this. Pilate did exactly the opposite of this. He wanted them to go away, but instead of saying Jesus was innocent, get out of here, he chose the lesser of two evils. And I have to believe that what happened after that caused all the other proconsuls to pay attention and say, hey, that wasn't the way to do it. So that's why the Gallio incident was put in the text. Remember, Luke could put anything he wanted in there, and everything he put in there had a reason. Well, that was the reason he threw that story in. But the point of the matter is that only the Romans could take care of somebody, kill somebody. Only the Romans could do that. And the only way they could do that is if they were convicted of some crime against Roman law. And not being nice, when it comes to the scriptures, is not a crime against Roman law. So now let's see what happens after he leaves Corinth.
Antioch. The city becomes a new home for Christians who were dispersed from Jerusalem. This church above the city is actually a huge cave where the early Christians met in secret. Above the earliest of Christian churches, a mysterious relief carved onto the rocky cliff. It appears to be a large bust of a woman with a veil. We are to learn that it was carved around 175 BC, and it is Charon, the legendary boatman who ferried souls across the river Styx into the underworld. After spending some time in Antioch, Paul set out from there and traveled from place to place throughout the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. He would pass through his hometown of Tarsus. He was obviously very proud to be a Tarsian. When talking with the Roman military commander in Jerusalem, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. In this he was certainly correct. Tarsus being a very great center of learning and commerce. This young Turkish boy almost completely simulates the uphill struggle Paul experienced as an apostle, carrying the word of Jesus to the cities of Asia. Once again, Paul would leave his home and walk the highway into the Taurus Mountains to begin his third missionary journey. Well, what does he look like? We have a description in the apocryphal Acts of Paul and Thecla. It says, he was a man, small in size, bald-headed, bandy-legged, well-built, with eyebrows meeting, a rather long nose, and full of grace. For sometimes he seemed like a man, and sometimes he has the countenance of an angel. He was a man of the city, a pure urban type person, but he walked through the mountains as if he was a man of the countryside.
So you can see now he's ended his second journey. Now nobody asked how in the heck anybody knew when we've seen those mosaics and everything of Paul in these basilicas, what he looked like. Well, now you know what he looked like. See, the Apocrypha is a set of books that were never officially made into the Bible. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And so that's the description that they use. And if you recall the picture you saw, I mean, remember he had that bald head, and it looked exactly like he said. Also keep in mind that when he made his missionary journeys, he had this ailment that he kept talking about. And so not only is he fighting the people of the town, the Jews, all the other things, but people believe, scholars believe he might have had some form of epilepsy that came and went. So he's fighting that too. But he's still doing what he's doing. Isn't that incredible? So, and to have that kind of a focus every day, and to be able to stand up to all of these crazy things. I mean, they, like I just said, they brought him in front of the proconsul for heaven's sake. And remember, it's just him, and maybe a few others. He's outnumbered. It's like he's walking through town with a price on his head. But he still continues to do what he does. Isn't that incredible? Well, anyway, it's 10 minutes to, so it's about time we should get ready for church.